Good morning. My name is Mike Haasl, and I and my wife, Mickey Mickelwright, and our adult daughter, Emma Marie, are fairly new to this faith community. While attending in person occasionally for some years, we officially joined only since the COVID Zoom liturgies. It has been a pleasure to be with all of you each week and to get to know many of you through the post-homily breakout sessions. We have felt very welcomed. Thank you. As such a new member, I feel really humbled that Mary Loris invited me to share the reflection today. As we began to prepare for today's liturgy, I got an email from Essie. She wrote, "This wasn't my favorite gospel, done with angry and punishing gods." Maybe this gospel gives you the same sentiment. We have often heard the interpretation of this gospel is, use your God-given talents. And the angry, vengeful employer is taken to be the God figure dispensing talents. Today, I invite us to take a look at the gospel from a different angle, one that I heard about years ago from theologian and storyteller Megan McKenna. It is a subversive angle, subversive from the Latin to see from below. That is, from the perspective of the marginalized, in this case, the third employee. Let's start with, how does that employee see his or her employer? If you think of what it was like for the workers slaving away for probably pretty meager wages, that third employee does not seem to be a big fan of the wealthy boss. According to the text, the employee is afraid of the employer because he or she sees the employer as a, quote, harsh and demanding person, harvesting where you did not plant and gathering where you did not scatter. Let those words sink in. Harvesting where you did not plant, gathering where you did not scatter. So reading the story from below suggests that this is a story of a powerful, demanding employer who exploits workers and others for his own gain. And so the third employee buries the money, recognizing and refusing to participate in that exploitative domination system. The first and the second employees do the boss's bidding and go along. They apparently know the shtick pretty well, since they make a bunch of money in a short time. And the text suggests that the employer gets their income too. No wonder the boss is delighted and responds, "Come share my joy." But boy, if you don't go along with this domination system, you are shamed, called names, you worthless lout, and thrown out into the darkness where you will suffer. By simply refusing to go along, the third employee lays open for all to see the violence of the employer and really of the entire nation exploitative system. The position of this text is instructive and supports this interpretation. This gospel in Matthew is situated directly before Matthew 25:31-46. When I was hungry, you gave me to eat, and so on, in which, as we will hear next week, Jesus clearly states that he is to be identified with the poor and marginalized. And immediately following Matthew 25 is Jesus's entry into Jerusalem, where he, like the third employee in the parable, will be judged harshly, tortured and crucified, in significant part because he too refused to go along, in Jesus' case, with the pietistic norms of the scribes and Pharisees that called for isolation of lepers and other undesirables, not healing on the Sabbath, etc., choosing instead a path of unconditional love and inclusion of all, especially those on the margins. In this interpretation of today's gospel, then, Jesus is foreshadowing what will happen to him as they enter Jerusalem. Stepping back, then, the interpretation is totally turned on its head, right? The lout becomes the Christ figure, an innocent one who takes on suffering to expose the violence of the system. And that employer, who traditionally is seen as the God figure who dispenses talents we are to use, that one is the greedy, powerful exploiter who loves and uses an unjust system for his own gain, the face of the entire domination and exploitation system. It is fair to ask at this point, well, that is all well and good, but how is this good news? The third employee, like Jesus, was innocent, but caused to suffer. Doesn't seem too good. I think it is good news in the sense that the third employee's refusal to go along and his subsequent terrible treatment exposes the violence of the employer and the whole domination system. It becomes especially good news to the extent that we, in solidarity with the violated, take action to change that injustice. John Lewis was brutalized for refusing to go along with the embedded racial injustice in the 1960s. But there was good news when those scenes became national news and the Voting Rights Act was signed a short time later. George Floyd was an innocent Black man too, whose suffering and horrible death exposed a domination system where the injustice in the police system had become normalized. The good news is that as a result of exposing that racism in such a raw and horrific way on that May evening, people around the country and the world have begun to learn and to work to make changes that will move us towards God's vision of justice and inclusive community. That is indeed good news. The Spirit community itself knows a little about the cost of non-cooperation with injustice, albeit in a less violent, catastrophic, but nonetheless hurtful way. For many years, you created liturgies that were inclusive, including women and non-clerics in leadership, in a way that was outside the norms of the institutional church. Over 12 years ago, for that refusal to comply with the system, you paid a price, being thrown out, as it were, into the darkness. Is that the sound of wailing and gnashing of teeth I hear out there? The story of Mickey's and my interaction with the institutional church is actually similar. 30 years ago, my wife Mickey was the director of pastoral care at St. Thomas of Canterbury in uptown Chicago, where we attended the 9 a.m. liturgy. The main clerical presider was Bob Bossy, a Sacred Heart priest on staff at the Eighth Day Center for Justice. Our liturgy included, like yours, inclusive language, the priest sitting among the people, and so on. Around that time, a new, less tolerant diocesan priest became the pastor. When our daughter, Emma Marie, whom many of you have met during the breakout sessions and who tunes in every Sunday to the Spirit Zoom liturgies from London, was baptized, she was baptized in the name of God, Father and Mother, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That intolerant pastor was listening in, waiting at the rear of the church. Upon hearing those words, he abruptly opened the door, incensed that we had baptized our child in the name of 4 persons. He promptly erased the names from the ledger of all of the children who had been so baptized with those words by Father Bossy, about 8 children. After a barrage of phone calls to the chancery, those baptisms were eventually reinstated. But Emma's baptism became the impetus for an attempt at St. Thomas to force compliance with the norms of the institutional church. As at St. Stephen's, that provoked a great rethinking, a holding on to our values. And out of it, something new emerged there too. In Chicago, our community was called St. Harold's because we held the liturgy in the common space of a single-room occupancy building named for Harold Washington, the first Black mayor of Chicago. And so you see, our family, Mickey and Emma and myself, and our second daughter, Mary, who sometimes also tunes in, really are kindred spirits with the Spirit community. So the challenge of the gospel in today's interpretation is less about will we use our talents and more about are we going to go along with or resist systems of injustice. May our shared wisdom give us bold courage to act for justice. Thank you for your kind attention and for welcoming us to your community. The specific questions I want to leave with you are these. Where have you experienced or witnessed systems of violence or exploitation or injustice that have become normalized and need to be exposed? Or how are we challenged to not go along with them? What would be the cost? What might be the final good result? Thank you.